The 4K monitor space just got tough. Well, how tough? Let's find out right here, right now on Robeytech. As 4K monitors continue to be manufactured, the better they become, or so we hope. ASUS has released their ASUS TUF VG28UQL1A 4K monitor. I really wish companies would just come up with better names for monitors. I mean, this has been a never-ending meme for how long? I mean, the ASUS TUF VG28UQL1A is just a mouthful to say. Call it Megatron 4K or something. Cooler than ASUS TUF VG28UQL1A. And it's not just ASUS. LG has like the Ultra Gear line, which is great, but they then throw in the model like the LG Ultra Gear 27GN950-B at the end of it. But I'm just a tech dad, looking to make things easier, and there's probably a reason for all these identifiers that's not for me to decide. I just review the parts, right? I just review the monitors. Well, let's get back to the review. Fine. The ASUS TUF VG28UQL1A 4K gaming monitor is a sleek-looking monitor that retails for $799.99. Oh, I know. And it's a rather easy one to set up right out of the box. I mean, hey, that's good, right, for 800 bucks? In fact, the only thing we had to attach was the base, as the arm comes pre-mounted. That base was easy to attach, and it's just a toolless screw that connects to the base of the arm. I want to give ASUS some kudos here, as some monitors it takes like rocket science to build them. And I'm looking at you, Corsair and Samsung. Okay, let me get off the soapbox for a minute and let's get back to the review. Let's look at what comes in the box and the outside of the monitor before we go into how it performs. Inside the box, you get your typical HDMI, ultra high-speed cable, a DisplayPort cable, your power adapter, power cord, quick start guide, a USB 3 cable, and your warranty card. Pretty typical stuff for what a monitor comes with. Oh yes, that's right. It also comes with the monitor as well. Now, when you put this side by side next to the common 27-inch monitor, which kind of rules the game space right now as far as size, there is a noticeable difference in size. Yes, I know it's only an inch, but you can tell right out of the box that it's just a bigger monitor. And you can tell that from the base of the monitor, which is what it stands on. The base is rather large. And you know it's all about that base, okay. As you compare the dimensions of the monitor with and without the stand, with the stand, the monitor is 21¼ inches tall, or 539.8 millimeters. Without the stand, it is 14.5 inches tall, or 369.35 millimeters. That's a 7-inch increase in height with the stand. And for depth without the stand, it sits at 2.5 inches, or 65.65 millimeters, and with the stand, it's 8.5 inches, or 213.8 millimeters. Another increase of 6 inches. The stand is about the entire width of the monitor too, so make sure you have room on your desk when deciding to use this monitor. Another thing to note is that the monitor without the stand weighs about 10 pounds, so make sure you have a proper mount, as the mount is VESA compatible with 100 by 100 millimeters, and you don't want to buy one that won't support the weight. With the stand, the monitor comes in at 15 pounds. For the mechanical design portion of the monitor, such as tilt, swivel, pivot, and height adjustment, the monitor viewing angle is your typical 178 degrees. You can tilt this about 20 degrees tilting up and 5 degrees tilting down. It does swivel, which is a nice 15 degrees in both directions, and it does pivot 90 degrees, so you can use that portrait or landscape mode, hence the really long base. The buttons for the monitor are in the lower right-hand corner if you're looking directly at the monitor, and there are 5 of them. You have your power button on the bottom. Above that, you have a game visual button that lets you set screen modes such as racing mode, cinema mode, RGB mode, etc. Above the game visual button, there is a Game Plus button. This button provides a toolkit and is supposed to create a better gaming environment for users when playing different types of games. This gives you things like crosshair, a timer, FPS counter, display alignment, etc. The FPS counter is a nice touch if you don't want to have to download a software monitoring program such as MSI Afterburner or EVGA Precision X1. Just above the Game Plus button, you have the close button, which you guessed it, closes out the menu option. And finally, we have the top of the buttons, the 5-way button. This is the multi-function button that turns on the OSD, enacts the OSD menu button, increases, decreases value, or moves your selections up, down, left, or right. These buttons do get confusing, by the way, because of the shape of them and how they are alternating and how they sit. It's just kind of weird. For ports on the monitor, you have all your normal ports in there, such as your DC in power port, your one DisplayPort 1.4 with DSC, two HDMI 2.0 ports, two HDMI 2.1 ports, one USB-B or upstream port, two USB-A 3.1 ports for the built-in USB hub. You can also use this for things like USB-powered speakers, like the Creative Pebbles. It also has a 3.5-inch earphone out jack. Pretty much standard, and it's nice to see the built-in USB hub, along with two HDMI 2 and two HDMI 2.1 ports. No KVM switch here, which has been nice to see on things like Aorus monitors, even though it has all the ports needed to actually use one. It is something that ASUS chose not to include with this monitor, and there is no USB-C port, which is kind of a letdown. Now, the monitor does have built-in speakers, but the quality is okay at best. With the bass and low sounds, it can sound very tinny. I mean, they're monitor speakers, so they're gonna work for you if you're just tooling around on the web. But if you're looking for audio in things like games, buy some external speakers or use a headset, unless you're just a monster. Alright, enough about the outside of the monitor, let's talk about the specs that this has before we went into testing. This monitor is a 4K gaming monitor that has a 28-inch screen and a resolution of 3840 by 2160. The monitor is also 144 Hz refresh rate and has a 1 millisecond response time. 144 Hz is kind of a sweet spot for 4K gaming, although there are some monitors that are coming in at 165 Hz or even 170 Hz, such as the MSI Artemis 323 CQR. Right now, there isn't really hardware that really supports that unless you're playing on low visual settings, but if you want that option at 4K, they are there. It is also NVIDIA G-Sync and AMD FreeSync Premium certified, so you won't have any tearing issues when you are gaming as long as you have these options on. When you're using HDMI 2.1 ports on this monitor, it will support native 4K 120Hz gaming on both the PS5 and Xbox Series X as well. Yay! Console gamers can use monitors. Now, looking further into the display of the monitor, you will see that this is an LED blacklight and an IPS panel. The surface of the monitor is just called non-glare, and using it for a bit, the non-glare actually works quite well. There is display HDR 400, followed by color space of 90% DCI-P3, with 8-bit color and a contrast ratio of 1000:1. The same contrast ratio we saw on the Corsair Xeneon 32-inch 2K monitor. With the 90% DCI-P3, we did notice that the color seemed a bit washed out. And follow that by the 1000:1 contrast ratio, the blacks were a bit gray and not as deep as the 4000:1 contrast ratio on the Aorus FV43U we reviewed recently, and you can check that out right here. We had to turn HDR on to get what ASUS claimed to be the 1,000,000:1 contrast ratio, where the blacks looked like they were supposed to, but even then, they still seemed a little washed out and nowhere near as deep or as rich as we saw on the Aorus FV43U. Now, when you are in the settings in the monitor and you're controlling the brightness, you will notice that the monitor does get bright with 300 nits and even brighter with HDR on 450 nits. Pretty awesome. Alright, enough nerding out about the specs of the monitor, Robey. How does it actually perform? Now, as we do in all monitor reviews, we run it through the inverse ghosting test, also known as the UFO test. As we dug into ASUS variable overdrive settings on the monitor, we found that the UFO image on the test was blurry across all OD modes, and there isn't much, if any, difference in image quality for the modes. When we set the overdrive settings to 0, we also found that there weren't any blur trails to speak of. But that didn't last long as we started to move through the 5 settings, and the blur trails got worse as we went up, as you can see from these pictures here. Now remember, this is just in the UFO test. We'll talk more about how this performs in games a little bit later. Now, the UFO test is designed to show motion blur, ghosting, and artifacts on screen. Does this mean if you see ghosting and blur trails in the UFO test that you will see ghosting and blur trails in games? Maybe. Potentially not really, but again, it's a great indicator of how this thing is going to perform in the real world. Alright, let's actually get to gameplay and see how this does. All games were tested at 4K and 144 Hz. For testing on the games, we found that the overdrive setting should be left at default or level 2 for all gameplay. If you put overdrive any higher, you will potentially experience ghosting and blur trails, which is what we experienced in our testing, and it did have an impact on our game testing during high motion sequences. The first game we tested was Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and during the test and the game, the blur trails and ghosting weren't really found. There were a few instances we saw, but what really stood out is the fact that this game takes place in caves or at night, so the blacks and grays could have looked a whole lot better. We did adjust some of the contrast, brightness, and sharpness, but comparing it to like the Corsair Xeneon and the Aorus monitor we talked about earlier, it didn't stack up with the richness of those colors. That's not to say that it's terrible, but this monitor is $800. Even at 4K and 144 Hz, if you have the machine to power this, you want it to look good. And regardless, at $800, that's a lot of money. So maybe instead, potentially catching that Aorus FV43U on sale, which is, we've seen as low as $999.99, which is only $200 more and it's 43 inches, might be a better option. Now, the second game we tested on it was Call of Duty Warzone. And this is one that was a little bit of a different story. From the get-go and dropping into Verdansk, the blur trails were prevalent, and even on overdrive settings on 2 or 0. Once we got off the ground of Verdansk, the blur trails went away and we were able to enjoy some solid gameplay that looked great. But again, the colors were still not as nice as we would have wanted for $800. Now finally, we tested Apex Legends. On this game, we got different results than we did on Call of Duty Warzone. We didn't see the blur trails like we did in Warzone. In fact, the gameplay was quite good. Again, the colors being a bit washed out for a monitor this price was a bit of a letdown, but nothing we really couldn't get past. Now, a few things before we wrap the review up. Now, we did use this monitor with some normal tasks, such as Microsoft Office, shopping online, Canvas, as well as a slew of other programs. The monitor is a great monitor for all of those, as spreadsheets were easy to read once we disabled hardware acceleration graphics in File, Options, Advanced, and Display. Like I said, once we were able to do that, Office looked really good on this monitor. There were some programs that we ran on the monitor for art creation, such as GIMP and Affinity Design. This is where the color issue being washed out was actually very prevalent. If you're an art major or you work in the design field, I would have to say that this is not the monitor for you. Again, looking for something with a higher coverage of the color gamut might be a better option, as this is more of a gaming focused monitor and not necessarily on content creation, specifically when it comes to design. All right, there you have it. All the specs, the testing, and our thoughts on the monitor. Now, do we recommend it? For the price of $800, I can honestly say you can find better monitors with better color quality and deeper blacks. Take a look at the Gigabyte M28U or the LG Ultra Gear. With these, the colors are richer, the blacks and darker colors are better, and the panels seem to be a higher quality, with less ghosting and blur trails. So all in all, there are better monitors out there for the price. Unless you have an all ASUS TUF gaming setup, such as a GT501 TUF case, a TUF Gaming 3080 Ti, a TUF motherboard, and everything else TUF, then buy this monitor to match the aesthetics. If you don't, you're better off buying one of the other aforementioned monitors in this review. And that's it. What did you think? Was there something we missed? Was there something we did that you loved? Were you considering this monitor at one point? We'd love to know all of that down in the comments below. Now, while you're down there, make sure you slap that subscribe button, whip that like button, and ring that notification bell so you get a notification each and every time we either go live or post a new video right here on Robeytech. Also, join our amazing community over at discord.gg/Robeytech, where you can talk about things like monitors, or PC builds, or tech reviews. They're incredible, and there are a ton of people, and they'd love to have you, and I'd love to chat with you as well. If you're looking for deals on things like monitors or maybe PC parts, check out RobeytechDeals.com. We got Tom the Bot scouring the internet finding the best prices for you, so check it out either at Robeytech Deals on Twitter or RobeytechDeals.com. Finally, you can always follow us on all the socials. We're at Robeytech everywhere. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one.